Tony Wagner, our keynote speaker tonight, is going to discuss how to lead with empathy. You may find that some of the simplest changes in behavior will drastically improve your leadership abilities. Tony Wagner is a senior VP of Commercial and Strategic Relations with Onyx, a global provider of business-to-business payments and intelligent solutions to the hospitality industry. In his role, Tony leads Onyx's global efforts in sales, strategic accounts, and global channel partnerships. He started this role in early 2020 and has been guiding his team through the industry's transformation due to the pandemic. Prior to Onyx, Tony worked for 20 plus years with CWT, a global travel and event management company, where he served as vice president of the Americas and South Pacific for the CWT meetings and events division. While responsible for his own business unit with CWT, Tony led his team to 400% growth over a decade and helped CWT meetings and events become a market leader in the Americas. Tony holds a Bachelor's of Science degree in corporate finance from the University of Minnesota and later completed the Carlson Executive Leadership Program and CWT Executive Leadership Program. Outside of work, Tony served 4 terms as city council member for the city of Minnetonka and currently services on the board of directors for the University of Minnesota Alumni Association. While at the University of Minnesota, Tony joined our Minnesota Alpha chapter and served as chapter president and student body president. His experiences with SIGEP and professionally have prepared him to lead with empathy, which he'll be sharing stories around today. Tony will explain the value of placing yourself in someone else's shoes and how we can all approach situations cautiously and with care. Tony, the next 30 minutes are yours to share insight and advice for our chaplains, and we'll have the last 10 minutes of those reserved for questions of the group. The floor is yours.
Perfect. Well, thanks, Brendan, and greetings to all the brothers out there. Hope you're having a great end of March and preparing here as we are here in Minnesota for bright skies and a great year. So it's kind of crazy. I was telling Brendan and Tom before everyone joined that 25 years ago, next month, I started my career outside of university life, right? And I was blessed, right, to have a lot of opportunities. One was to come and work for SIGEP. Another was my alma mater, the University of Minnesota, had a great alumnus called Curtis L. Carlson, who asked me to come work at his company, the Carlson Companies at the time. And so as I was preparing for tonight and thinking about it, I went back and looked at, I had taken notes. When I first got to Carlson, I was able to interview 30 to 40 executives at their company. They had 4 to 5 divisions at the time. And I typed up all those notes after I was done for the year, and I still have them kind of in my desk in case I ever want to reference them. And it was interesting, right? When I prepared for this, I asked questions of all those executives around career advice, around how to approach the roles in companies you have, on relationships, on leadership. And there was 5 things that popped out: the importance of relationships, the importance of listening, and how when you listening, you build trust with others, right? Which is critical to kind of having an empathetic conversation. How you always want to put yourself in someone else's shoes. Brendan talked about that. I'll give you some examples here tonight around how I've done that as a leader and how it's been valuable. In general, the importance of talent, right? Today we're talking about leading within your chapter, right? Your chaplains today. You're the shoulder, right, that people come to. You uphold the chapter's values and expectations, but you're all part of a team, right? And you need to have a high-performing team. As a leader, your role is to really make sure that they grow, right? That you inspire them, that you motivate them. And sometimes you need to be vulnerable and empathetic when you're talking with them, even if you don't have it in your core body. Not everyone is naturally empathetic, so make sure you do that. So what I wanted to chat about tonight is kind of bring that theme together, right? Of relationships, of listening and trust, of putting yourself in someone else's shoes, the importance of talent and team, and then situationally, how you kind of can leverage empathetic leadership. So I'm going to warn you, I don't mind talking. I love talking, actually. Any good person that's in charge of commercial organizations love to talk. But in 10 minutes, I'm expecting a lot of questions because this time is for you, not for me, right? I'm here because I want to help high-performing, well-educated men who care about building something more than what you maybe inherited when you first got to your chapters, something bigger, right? And there's nothing more important than continual learning. So thanks for taking some time tonight. So I thought I'd talk with a few stories, right? And I'm going to use them through different parts of my career and extracurricular activities. First, Brendan indicated that I was an elected public official for 4 terms. That is kind of a thankless job, is what I can tell you, right? I was passionate about it. I loved it. I wouldn't trade it for anything in the world. But many times what I would find myself doing, especially later on in my city council career, most people come to you with problems or something they want to change. And nothing is more viral than if something wants to be built at a city next to your home that you don't like, right? And so I was in about, I think I was in year 14 of 16 as a city council member, right? I will say with fact, I was starting to lose a little bit of empathy, right, for the concerns that were coming up. Right, but my role as the leader, right, of an elected leader in the city, was to make sure that I was there for my constituents. So we had a situation where a neighborhood had 6 houses bought up. There was going to be a large structure put on this building right next to their homes. There was a very quick organized group of neighbors who were angry, right? Who didn't know what to do. They were a little bit lost. They didn't understand how it could be done, right? And my job as a council member, you need to be pretty unbiased, right? Technically, by law in the state of Minnesota, you cannot state what your vote will be before something comes up to a vote. And so in that situation, the first thing we did is I said I'd be happy to meet with the neighbors. And so they organized a meeting at their home. There was 20 neighbors there, right? And what I did is I listened, and I listened, and I listened. And what I tried to do is 2 things. First part was I tried to understand what their concerns were. The second part, I asked a number of open-ended questions, why it was bothering them, right? Really, most things in life come down to change. And then I thought a little bit, and I talked a little bit about situational leadership. When you get into these situations, not everyone is the same, right? Some people, when you need to lead with empathy, are more highly competent, right? They can handle maybe harder conversations. Some people maybe are not confident, right? Maybe they don't have the right skill to handle this. And so you as a leader need to read that situation, okay? Know your audience. And so in this case, I knew this was a scared audience, right? Was looking for direction. And so I tried to become what I would call more directive. And I put myself in their shoes and said, if I was living here, what would I do? What would I feel? Right? Well, I would feel many of the same things. Right now, I would have done my research before I bought a home to see if that could have been developed there. But nonetheless, right, I did feel their pain. And so what I went to in that situation is after I let them talk, I felt that my role was to help them be successful. Right? How could they understand what was permitted? So the use that was going to be where these homes were tore down was a permitted use by the city. It could be built, no problem. But what I did is I sat there and I helped guide them, right, around how they could take control of the situation by articulating a story in a way that could raise concerns to the audience they were dealing with. Right? So they came in scared, right? They came in very angry. They attacked the situation. And through listening and empathizing with them and kind of indicating, I'm here to help you make your case. I may not vote for it. I can't guarantee I will vote the way you want me to vote, but I'm here to make sure you're successful. And so in that situation, this group, I met with them 3 to 4 more times. Or each time they got more and more confident. Every once in a while, anger would come up. I don't understand this again. And then we would go back and listen and re-talk about that. But through that process, it was kind of an example of here's a group that needed more direction, right? Less coaching. They needed to be directed at the beginning. Over through that time, it wasn't a point in time empathetic leadership with them, right? It was a journey on that situation. And they ended up making a great case, doing a better job than I would have done had I put together the proposal on why this didn't fit the way it was designed. And that actually did not pass the council, even though it was a permitted use for a number of valid reasons. And so the story there gets back to this idea of, again, I could have easily said in that scenario, it's permitted, right? Go away. I'm in year 14. I'm not running for re-election. I'm done with this. But that wasn't my role. Just like that's not your role, right? Listen, understand, but also think about where they are at personally and don't make assumptions. Okay. So that's point 1. Good story? Yeah. All right, good. I'm going to go to number 2. Second story. This was more of a more personal story from someone that didn't report to me as a leader at CWT when I was there, but was a salesperson, right? The individual aspired. We had an opening for which is called a sales leader role, probably at a director level in the company. And he approached me for 2 things. He approached me because he was interested in the role. And he thought he was a very good candidate, right? And asked if he would have my support. And so I paused, right? And I asked him a few questions. And so I think I took a look at some of your coursework tonight, right? I think this is in the coursework, if I remember correctly. But I'm going to give you a preview of what was going through my mind when he set up this meeting to talk to me about his performance and the opportunity to get promoted. I thought, I need to be honest with this person because the skills that he thinks he has are a material gap away from where he needs to be successful in this role. Okay. And so in your reading, or what will maybe go through your workshops tonight, there's a tool that is used when you're in this kind of a situation of being empathetic, right? I could have been evil and said, you got no shot, right? But I didn't want to do that because I didn't want to crush his dreams. My goal is to lead and motivate a team. And so I said to him, why do you think you're a good fit for this role, right? Open-ended question. I asked him another question that probed a little bit deeper and challenged him. How would you then lead a team? And gave him some specific examples where he hadn't done that himself as an individual performer, right? I then went into a scenario outlining and said, how will you respond when you have goals and expectations that are going to be doing these things, right? And through the conversation, I never told him he wouldn't be a candidate for the job, right? I never told him he was not performing in his new job or his current job, right? But when I went through that process and asked him those open-ended questions, he quickly came to realize maybe I just want the title, but I wasn't ready for the role. So fast forward 10 years, right? I've left CWT. I was driving back from our lake cabin a few weeks ago. Up pops a text from this individual. who basically thanked me for, identifying for him a new career path, identifying that he had weaknesses that he was hiding all this time. And that by having that conversation at that point in time, and not saying, no, you're not a candidate, but helping him self-reflect, he was a better and more successful salesperson, and then eventually sales leader. So, sometimes when it's challenging and it needs to be a courageous conversation, sometimes there's a point to put yourself in the shoes, right? It's always a time to listen, as I said earlier, but you never shy away, even if someone is vulnerable, from trying to really be direct, right? If that was been a little bit different of a situation and you were in a performance situation, right? Whether that's at work or whether at school today, and someone isn't meeting the expectations you have, you can empathize with them, right? You can put them in their situation, and that doesn't mean having sympathy for what happened, which I think you guys will be talking about tonight. I've had horrible situations that my staff came to me with that your heart pours out for them. But in those cases, you need to also recognize sympathy is not empathy, right? Empathy is putting yourself in their shoes, trying to help them, guide them to a new place, and still hold them accountable if necessary, right? So the last story that I was going to use is kind of, I think, pertinent today. And this is going to happen when you get farther into your careers, maybe not as much in your day-to-day life at SIGEP today. But it's really around this idea of how do you empathize with a group that's going through a major change? And so I'll kind of walk you through a scenario. COVID has obviously had a dramatic impact around the world. I can tell you, I don't think there's another industry in the world that's been as heavily impacted as the hospitality industry. Hospitality includes restaurants, hotels, travel, etc. And so there's a lot of really hard decisions that leaders have to make, right? And anytime there's hard decisions and change, and there is, I would call, a business under stress. Much like that city council conversation, people get scared. People make their own tapes up to what's happening inside, and you lose the will of the team, right? You can, if you don't handle it correctly, the culture starts to erode, right? And anytime people are scared, right, it's a challenge. And so what I found of a role of a leader, especially with being empathetic, is you have to recognize that first, right? And this gets a little bit into situational. Everyone handles it a little bit differently. So as an example, even though I was no longer at CWT anymore, a number of my old team members called me, and they were nervous about what was going on there, right? And I was a little safer because I wasn't the boss anymore, right, of all these people. But they called me, and they said, I'm not sure what to do, right? And so what it is, I empathize with them, right? It was a little hard because I left before this all happened, right? And so I'm kind of the luckiest guy in the entire world that I left a travel and meetings company before COVID hit, right? But I empathized with them. I walked them through things. I asked a lot of open-ended questions. How stable is the rest of their family's jobs, right? I asked them how much they still love the industry, and many of them bleed the industry. But you could tell that they were losing confidence, right, in the organization and the leadership, right? And so what I said to them is I tried to give them context. I said, put yourself in the CEO's shoes, the executive team's shoes, right? This is going to be probably too much information, so I'm going to put you under a quick confidentiality agreement. But I said to them, here's a firm who employs 18,000 people around the world, whose revenue line went from 100% run rate, February was a pretty good month, more than likely, to literally negative last week because you're issuing refunds, right? to people that had done business with you before, to the fact that you have $1 billion in debt on the balance sheet that has interest payments due every single quarter with loan covenants. And you could not make those payments. They have to make decisions. They are hard, right? They are gut-wrenching when 70% of the people might have to go on furlough, but they have a duty as a leader to think of the best for the organization. And they can't tell you everything that's going on. So if you were in those shoes, what would you do? Right? Give them some context. So change is hard, right? That my city council example, change was hard for that group, right? They didn't know what to do. They were scared, right? A person earlier, right? The sales leader or salesperson that wanted to be a leader wasn't self-aware of where he was at today, but I didn't want to tell him you got no shot. How do you help them as a leader? Put yourself in their shoes. What would you want to hear if you were in that situation, right? You'd want to get to the conclusion yourself, and then you'd want to figure out a development plan to get where you need to go so you can get that job in the future. And when crisis is happening, don't hold it all in. Help people understand the why. Put yourself in their shoes. So, it's hard. Not every time do you want to be empathetic as a leader. I will tell you that. Sometimes you're like, seriously, people, you've got to be kidding me, right? But it's important, right? And I think what you're going to talk about tonight around courageous conversations is a key part of it, right? Go in with a plan, right? Don't give people an out if you need to have a tough conversation with them, but do it with empathy if you can, right? If someone's really messed up, really bad, and it was purposeful, that's not a time to have empathy, right? So you got to read your situation. You got to read your audience of how prepared they are to handle the different types of conversations. Someone that's highly competent, I wouldn't have had to give as much as I did on that business challenge, right, that my former employer had, right? Someone that's brand new in the role, you got to be more directive and supportive of them. And there's a range in between. So I believe I'm at 25 minutes. So it's time for Brendan to make sure that I'm stopping talking. But is that what you want me to do, Tom and Brendan? Is that good?
Yeah, that's perfect timing, actually.
Good.
So floor is now open for questions from the group. You can either come off mute and just ask your question, or you can type it in the chat and I'll relay it to Tony. So everyone.
I can read chat too. I do Zoom calls all day long, buddy. No worries.
Tony's got this one then.
Hey, Tony. It's Simon from Ohio Theta.
Hey, Simon.
So hearing what you said about addressing culture and kind of seeing that kind of distraught within a chapter, but finding an effective way to address it without seeming, whether it be too soft or too hard. I just kind of wanted to take your thoughts. Like, if you see the temperature of the chapter kind of decreasing or not where you want it to be or where it used to be, what are kind of your ways you could effectively communicate or start planting the seeds for a great fall semester, which is what I believe everyone is excited for?
Yeah, so you probably, I don't know your chapter numbers, Simon, right? But I'm guessing it's a decent sized chapter. So, facilitating a conversation like that with 80 people or whatever the number is, that's a little hard. Right. I would recommend when you're looking at that, if there's kind of two ways about it. I always like to segment my audience, right? And so I would segment my audience if there's, what might a younger member, right, or a more engaged member be one set of audience. Maybe you have a more experienced member, right, that's been in leadership. And how do you kind of do, I would say, many little informal focus groups with that group, chatting through that. You can have a group discussion, right, that tries to seek to understand their thoughts, right? If they raise good points, again, you can try to put yourself in their shoes and see if you can see it that way, right? Sometimes, when you dig into these things and you peel back the onion, people's personal circumstances can be part of that. Sometimes it can be decisions that were made that people didn't have the context to, I'm a big believer that ongoing communication is a big positive enabler to making sure you keep your culture. Because if not, people make up their own stories, right? If you lose control of the narrative, just like in a political campaign, once you start explaining, you're losing, right? And so if you can keep that dialogue going on, I think it'll help you kind of get a vibe on that and how to then have that group help you take it forward. Perfect. If that helps.
Yeah, definitely, 100%.
Who else is brave? Simon gets Brave Award #1. Love it. And thanks for all the video people too. I like the video people. You know, I'm not going to discriminate against non-video people, but I like that.
I just wanted you to expand on something you had just said. You had mentioned if you are explaining, you're losing.
Yeah.
Could you unpack that a little bit?
Well, what I would say is, as someone that's ran for office a lot of times, right? You want, and I think just even as being a leader, right? You want to have a story, right? So part of our jobs, I always like this, our role is to inspire, motivate your team to do better, to learn more, and to challenge themselves to elevate. Okay. So when I think about when I was running for office, I wanted to elevate my campaign to make sure that the voters were elevating with me, right? And so what I would tell you is when you think about the narrative that you want to have within the chapter, or when you're trying to drive something forward as a leader, having a vision of where you want to go and why is very helpful to move people with you, versus letting someone else control the narrative. And the narrative could be, in my last example that I gave, right around really tough decisions my former employer had to make. They had lost control of the narrative, right? The way they lost control of the narrative is they weren't talking to their staff members. And mind you, crisis, right? But people were making up their own stories. The company will go bankrupt, right? They will liquidate because of all the cuts they're doing. And so my point is, when they actually had to get back and talk to their employees, they were already explaining things that they had lost the audience because no one talked to them, right? Everyone else had made up their own story in their minds. And no matter how many times you repeat it, you weren't going to get rid of that already written story, right? And so in politics, right, if you have to start explaining a position, but someone's already said, I'm going to make it up, easy one, like, you know, he's going to raise taxes, right? And that's the first attack mailer that goes out, right? Well, you've been branded that way. How many times are you going to have to prove that you aren't do that? And that's not actually your history. Someone else already made the story. It's already been impressioned with someone's mind. So a little bit different than empathetic leadership, but I thought I'd give you the background on that. So.
Thank you.
No problem.
So as someone who likes to talk, how did you learn to listen?
I will tell you, not kidding, Dane. Were you on at the very beginning? Yes or no?
Yeah.
Okay, so feedback immediately, right? When I started at Carlson was, you need to listen more. And there was two pieces, right? One, it was, there was a perception internally because I was blessed with a really nice role when I started there. And so who is this 22-year-old walking around and having 40 interviews with executives at the company? And they were like, you're not arrogant, but never appear arrogant by talking all the time. So I wrote that down, right? And then other feedback was, you always have good ideas, but it's good to listen first, then do it. So I have consciously worked over time to make sure that's top of mind, right? And I would say when you get into these situations, for me, the idea of starting things with an open-ended question, like let's say you had a performance issue with an employee, right? Or with someone that's on your team. Before you go in and say, here's some things that we see we got to improve, I always ask them 100%, how do you feel, right? When I start my job interviews with potential staff members, I actually start by asking them questions instead of me asking them questions. And at the end, I let them ask questions. Helps me see if they're prepared. I learn a little snippet of them, right? So I think it's hard. I do like to talk, as you can imagine, as my wife would say, but it's something you got to work at. You know, it's got to be top of mind. Hope that was good.
I feel it.
Yep.
I'm with you. Yeah.
Yep. Good. What other
I have
questions?
a question.
Yeah.
So I'm the chaplain at University of Alabama, and we have a pretty decent sized chapter, about 150 guys, and
You're number one in everything, probably, because you're number one in football, and you're in the Sweet 16.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
championship
it's
school.
Right.
With such a big chapter, a lot of times there can be some drama within the certain members and everything like that. And I consider myself to be a pretty empathetic person, but how do you recommend bringing out empathy amongst other people so that they can kind of see what the other person is going through, like within chapter, bring empathy out of other people?
Well, I do think conversation helps that a little bit, right? So, read in a lot of my examples, the more that I really encourage people when they jump to conclusions about what's going on, to give them examples of saying, well, how do you really know X, Y, and Z? Do you know what their situation is, right? Do you know what's driving that? And you've maybe heard this in a different way. I always start with the idea that there's positive intent. That's what's going on, right? Now, people can prove you wrong. People can be evil, right? But if you start with positive intent and you seek to understand why before judging, it helps build trust, right? Maybe the people that, will open up more to you, right? That helps you help others. And so, try not to make assumptions, right? And try to highlight great stories about that. Stories sell. If you're selling a business, stories sell. If you're a chaplain in the chapter and you say, you know what, without breaking confidentiality, here's what a whole group of people thought was happening. When we engaged in a conversation, this was the driver. And again, you made your own narrative or your own story up. And so as people get examples of that, it just helps, right? Because then it can contextualize it for people and they react to that a little bit better. And I do it. Everyone jumps to conclusions. It's human nature, right? But I always try to kind of say, I get it. Let me ask why first.
Thank you.
No problem. Brendan says one more question, or is that already was the last question, Brendan?
We can do one more question.
Got it. Perfect. Now, I got a question for Brendan first. Is there anyone on from my alma mater, Minnesota Alpha, on this? If not, I am going to not be happy with those groovies.
I will let that be an invite for if there are any Minnesota Alpha members right now, please reveal yourself.
Just kidding. Rah, 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 Skyuma. Any other questions? You don't have to, but if you're brave, it's awesome.
Well, if nobody's going to say anything, Tony, could you distinguish between empathy and sympathy?
Yeah, I would say for me, it's like sympathy is when you really feel for someone, right? But maybe what's going on, they don't want to get out of, right? Like they got themselves in the situation, right? Empathy for me is you're putting yourself in their shoes and you understand how this happened or why they're feeling this way or whatever. And you're trying to understand that, but redirect them in the path that they need to go, right? In a healthy exchange. Where sympathy, you're just really feeling bad for them, right? You get it. I'm sorry you're in this situation. And so that's for me the distinguishing factor. Like I feel bad when I have to give someone a performance review, right? That is horrific because they're not performing. But if they've done it all to themselves, I have more sympathy for the fact that this is happening to them than I do empathy on putting themselves in the shoe or myself in their shoes on how they got in this situation.